On Sunday, the foreign ministers of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt flew to one city to figure out how to stop this war. Not Washington, not Geneva, not Ankara, Islamabad. The reason they came to Pakistan, and not the other way around, tells you everything about who is really running this diplomacy. March 22nd. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had his second phone call in 5 days with Iran's President Pezeshkian. And on Sunday, the foreign ministers of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt all flew to Islamabad, not to Ankara, not to Geneva, not to a neutral third city, specifically to Islamabad, because Pakistan is now the only country on earth that both sides of this war will actively communicate through. A country that just months ago was managing an IMF bailout, fighting the Taliban on its western border, and navigating a fragile ceasefire with India after a near-nuclear confrontation, has quietly inserted itself into the most consequential diplomatic effort of the 21st century. Pakistan did not get invited into this role, it inserted itself. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how it did that, and why no other country on earth could. Let's start with the structural advantages, because the mechanics of how Pakistan built this position are more extraordinary than the headline, and they explain why no other country could replicate it even if they tried. Why Pakistan, of all the countries in the world? Why is a state that needed an IMF rescue that is fighting the Taliban? Why is this the country that Iran will talk to and Washington will listen to? The answer is structural, and once you see it, it is airtight. Pakistan shares a 900-kilometer border with Iran. This is not a diplomatic abstraction. This is a physical reality that turns every refugee flow, every border skirmish, every disruption to cross-border trade into a domestic crisis for Islamabad. Pakistan cannot walk away from this war the way Qatar or Turkey can. The border does not disappear when talks fail. That skin in the game is exactly what makes Pakistan credible. Not a diplomatic opportunist, but a country with existential stakes in the outcome. Pakistan also has roughly 40 million Shia Muslims, the second largest Shia population on earth after Iran itself. Iran's leadership does not trust Sunni Arab governments. It regards Saudi Arabia as a co-instigator of the war that killed its supreme leader. It regards the UAE as too close to Israel. But Pakistan, with 40 million Shia citizens, with a 900-kilometer shared border, with an economy devastated by the Hormuz closure, is a country Tehran believes has genuine reasons to want this war to end that are not simply performance. At the same time, Pakistan signed a mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia in September 2025, meaning an attack on one is treated as an attack on both. That agreement gives Pakistan simultaneous credibility in Riyadh and Washington. Saudi Arabia needs Pakistan's mediation to succeed because every day the war continues, Iranian missiles are hitting Saudi oil infrastructure and depleting Saudi interceptor stocks. Saudi Arabia is quietly one of Pakistan's most important backers, because Riyadh needs an exit from this war that does not look like defeat. No other country on earth has all of these connections simultaneously, and that combination was not accidental. It was built deliberately over the 18 months before this war started. The personal rapport between Pakistan's Field Marshal Munir and Donald Trump is not a footnote to this story. It is the mechanism that makes everything else operational. Relationships between leaders are not peripheral to great power diplomacy. They are often the mechanism through which impossible things become possible. And this one was built during a crisis that the world almost forgot. In May 2025, India launched Operation Sindoor, strikes targeting Pakistani territory. Pakistan responded with its own military strikes. Two nuclear-armed neighbors went to the edge of direct military confrontation in a way that terrified every government watching. Trump intervened. He and Munir spoke multiple times during those tense days. Trump emerged publicly claiming credit for the ceasefire. That episode gave Munir something that most foreign military leaders spend entire careers pursuing: a personal channel to the Oval Office that functions independently of the formal State Department relationship between the two countries. In June 2025, during the 12-day Iran-Israel war, Munir visited Tehran, then flew directly to Washington for lunch at the White House. Trump walked out to the cameras afterward and said, "Pakistanis know Iran very well, better than most." That was not a spontaneous observation. It was Trump publicly validating the message Munir had just delivered to him in private. Pakistan had already positioned itself as the country that knows Iran before the 2026 war started. China then added another layer. Beijing conveyed support to Tehran for Pakistan's mediation, encouraging Iran to engage with the process. China buys over 80% of Iran's oil. When Beijing endorses the Pakistani channel, Tehran listens in a way it would not for a smaller endorsement. By September 2025, Pakistan had signed a defense pact with Saudi Arabia. By early 2026, it had the personal endorsement of China. It had Trump's direct line. It had Tehran's trust. The credibility architecture was complete, and it had been constructed before anyone needed it. The question now is, what is Pakistan actually doing with it? Pakistan is not just passing paper between two sides. What it is doing operationally goes far beyond what most coverage of this story has described. And one specific example, involving Iran's foreign minister, an assassination list, and an Israeli military decision, reveals exactly how much real power Pakistan has accumulated in this role. Pakistan's ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, has been back-channeling communications between Tehran and key figures in the Trump administration, including US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Intelligence-to-intelligence channels carry information that foreign ministry diplomats physically cannot transmit in formal communications. They can transmit nuance, probe red lines, test hypotheses, and relay what leaders actually think, not what they say publicly. Pakistan's ISI has relationships with Iranian intelligence going back decades, giving Pakistan a channel into Tehran's real thinking that no other country currently has access to, in a form that America can use. The specific document Pakistan has been carrying is Washington's 15-point ceasefire proposal. Iran rejected it publicly, but Iran's foreign minister has now met Pakistan's foreign minister twice in 1 week. And Iran's president told Pakistan's prime minister in a 90-minute phone call that the missing ingredient in all previous negotiations is trust, that Iran was attacked twice during earlier nuclear talks, and that confidence-building measures would be required before any direct dialogue could happen. That conversation reveals exactly why Pakistan's mediation is the most credible active track. Iran cannot tell Washington directly that it needs trust building before talks. Saying that to Washington would be read as weakness or a delay tactic. But saying it to Pakistan, which can relay the substance without the political optics, allows Iran to communicate its actual conditions without appearing to negotiate under military pressure. Pakistan is not a messenger, it is a translator, not just of language but of political context. Translating Iranian domestic political constraints into terms American officials can work with, without either side losing face. But it went further than translation. It intervened in an active military operation. Israel had Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi and parliament speaker Ghalibaf on its assassination target list. Both men are essential to any negotiated outcome. And Pakistan, a country with no diplomatic relations with Israel, a country that does not even recognize Israel as a state, intervened. According to Reuters reporting, Pakistan communicated to both sides that eliminating Iran's top diplomatic officials would destroy the diplomatic track entirely, and that both men were essential to any negotiated outcome. Israel responded by removing both from its target list. A nuclear-armed middle power with no formal diplomatic relationship with Israel influenced Israel's targeting decisions in an active military conflict. That is not message carrying. That is operational diplomatic power of the highest order. And Pakistan's non-recognition of Israel, which under normal circumstances would disqualify it as a mediator, turns out to be a structural advantage. Iran will not negotiate through any country that recognizes Israel, because accepting that mediation would imply indirect legitimacy for the Israeli state. The four-nation foreign minister meeting in Islamabad this past Sunday is the clearest public evidence of how central Pakistan has become. The meeting was originally planned for Ankara, Turkey's capital, a NATO member with its own strong mediation history. It was moved to Islamabad because Pakistan's involvement in relaying messages between Washington and Tehran had become so central that the other regional powers decided they needed to come to Pakistan, not ask Pakistan to come to them. That logistical detail, the relocation of a four-nation meeting from a NATO capital to Islamabad, is, in diplomatic terms, a statement of seismic proportions. The risks of this mediation are real, and Pakistan's analysts are publicly discussing them. Pakistan is simultaneously managing an active war against the Afghan Taliban, a fragile ceasefire with India, following a near-nuclear confrontation in May 2025, a domestic economy that only recently escaped an IMF bailout, and severe domestic energy shortages caused by the Hormuz closure. Adding superpower mediation as a fourth simultaneous crisis is an enormous institutional bet for any government. The domestic political dimension is equally fraught. The Iran war triggered protests across Pakistan that left 22 people dead and more than 120 injured. At least 12 people were killed near the U.S. consulate in Karachi when a mob breached the compound. Field Marshal Munir personally addressed Shia clerics in Rawalpindi on March 20th, warning that violence based on events in another country cannot be tolerated. Managing 40 million Shia citizens who are emotionally engaged with a war that killed their supreme leader, while simultaneously relaying American ceasefire proposals to the country those citizens regard as a fellow Muslim state under attack. That requires a political dexterity that tests any government at any level of strength. The potential returns, if Pakistan succeeds, are transformational. A successful mediation would be comparable to what Yahya Khan accomplished in 1972, facilitating Richard Nixon's opening to China, a moment that redefined how Washington viewed Pakistan's strategic utility and produced a decade of elevated American support. Pakistan has already demonstrated its capacity for high-stakes diplomacy, more recently, playing a critical behind-the-scenes role in facilitating negotiations between the Taliban and the Trump administration, which ultimately led to the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan and provided a structured, relatively secure pathway for U.S. disengagement. But in a multipolar world, a successful 2026 mediation would go even further, generating simultaneous validation from both Washington and Beijing, the two most important centers of global power. Pakistan would emerge from this crisis not as a country defined by its challenges, its nuclear proliferation history or IMF dependency, but as an indispensable diplomatic actor in the most dangerous geopolitical confrontation of the decade. That is a transformation in international standing that years of conventional diplomacy simply cannot buy. Regardless of whether the ceasefire happens in 72 hours or 72 days, something has already been permanently established. The world now knows what Pakistan can do when it chooses to act as a diplomatic power rather than waiting for others to assign it a role. That demonstration is permanent, regardless of the outcome. Pakistan inserted itself into this war. It built the relationships before they were needed, activated them at the right moment, and is now carrying the document that could end the most dangerous conflict the Middle East has seen in a generation. Whether it succeeds or not, it has already changed what the world believes Pakistan is capable of. The story doesn't end here. It evolves by the hour. The next move, whether that is Iran agreeing to direct talks in Islamabad or a breakdown that sends the mediation back to zero, will determine not just the future of this war, but the future of Pakistan's place in the world for the next generation. If you want to understand the next move before it makes the front page, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every development in this diplomatic race will be here, broken down the moment it matters. I'll see you in the next one.